Hello beautiful, welcome back to my channel. My name is Bettina and I'm the makeup enthusiast. In today's video we're talking about some palettes that I almost purchased in 2020. Some of these palettes I even put into my cart and I did not commit to the purchase. So if you want to know what palettes I almost purchased in 2020, then let's jump on into it right now. So I have 20 palettes on this list, which is crazy. Thinking about it now, like when I look at this list, if I purchased every single one of these palettes, my collection would have increased by 20 palettes, which is insane. I cannot even fathom bringing 20 new palettes into my collection. It's just like, so I'm kind of a little bit glad that I didn't buy these palettes, but at the same time, there are some palettes on this list that I'm still side-eyeing. There's some palettes that I'm still like, should I get them, shouldn't I? But there are also some palettes on this list that I'm thinking that I definitely will leave and wait for the next release from the particular brands. First one on the list is the new Nablu Cutie Eternal Eclipse palette. Now I'm just going to scooch over so I can put some photos here for you. I nearly purchased this palette because I wanted to try some eyeshadows from Nablu Cutie. This palette popped up and I was this close to purchasing it because Nablu Cutie is stocked on Glam Light, and Nablu Cutie actually releases their launches to basically be able to be launched at their stockers at the same time as he launches on their website or fairly close to that date. So Glam Light had this palette, I think on the day of his release of the palette, or it was like the next day or around that day. It was within the same week of the release of the palette on the Nablu Cutie website. It was released in Australia on Glam Light, which I think is absolutely fantastic. I love that Manny does that. I love that he makes sure that his palette is available globally on the same day. I really commend brands for doing that. So I almost purchased this palette, but I decided that it wasn't for me, just because of those gray tones. I don't wear a lot of gray, darker tones. I loved the blues in there, but it was the gray tones and the neutrals in there. I already have a lot of neutrals like that, so I decided to not pick up this palette. And I definitely do want to try an eyeshadow palette from Nablu Cutie in 2021. So if there is one that comes out that grabs my eye and I'm really keen on, I think I definitely will snap it up. The next one is the Nablu Cutie palette in the Wild Berry color story. So this is a 6-pan. This is a 6-pan like berry toned eyeshadow palette. I was this close to picking this up. I think I've put this in my cart like 5 or 6 times and I just haven't committed to buying it, but I will happily say that hubby purchased this for me for Christmas. So I do actually have this palette in my collection, but I personally didn't buy this, but I was so close to almost buying this so many times. It's a gorgeous palette. Number 3 is the Voss Sweet Violet palette. This is a 10-pan eyeshadow palette, and this is a very purple toned eyeshadow palette, and I love purple eyeshadows. Purple eyeshadows are my jam, so that is why I was really drawn to this palette. But in the end, I decided that I didn't need it because there wasn't much hype around this palette, so I didn't really think that I needed to pick it up for reviewing purposes, and I just wasn't 100% happy with the color story, just because I already have a lot of those tones in my collection, and I just decided that I definitely didn't need it, which I'm glad. Number 4 is the Pat McGrath Divine Rose 2 palette. Now, if I could get my hands on this palette in the metallic pink packaging, I would hands down buy this palette. I think after trying the Pat McGrath Celestial Divinity palette at Christmas time, I would hands down buy this palette if I could get it in the metallic pink packaging, but they only had a limited release of the metallic pink packaging for this palette, and I just wasn't quick enough. I don't really care for waking up really early or at like crazy hours of the night just to get makeup, so I missed out on getting the chrome packaging for this palette, and it is very expensive. It is ridiculously expensive. The next one was the Bare Minerals Natural Oasis palette. I almost picked this one up because I did like the color story of this one. This one was pretty much like a neutral palette with a pop of green though. But I am a big fan of the Bare Minerals eyeshadow formula, and that is one of the reasons why I was really keen to pick this one up, but I was just not quick enough to pick this one up. This was actually a limited edition palette. I think it's a little 8-pan eyeshadow palette. Then I have the Lethal and Jolina palette. This was a really pretty palette, but I didn't end up picking it up because I do prefer the customizable aspect of Lethal Cosmetics. So I would rather use the build your own palette aspect on their website as opposed to buying a pre-made palette. That way I can pick and choose exactly what colors that I want to purchase from them, rather than have a palette that is already like made for me and I might potentially not like one or two of the shades in the palette. Then we have the Urban Decay Ultraviolet palette, and I am so glad that I didn't buy this palette. When I first saw it released, I saw that it was a purple tone palette, and you guys know I love purple eyeshadows, but after seeing everyone's reviews and seeing that it wasn't quite up to scratch, I was very happy that I didn't purchase this one, but it was very close. It was very, very close. Then I have the Ace Beauté Nostalgia palette, and I actually quite like the color story of this palette. This palette had that beautiful teal that I normally love and the yellow. It also had some pinks and purples in there. It was a very pretty palette when it was swapped, but I decided against it. I saw this for pre-order through a couple of Australian websites and I was very tempted. I was very close to picking it up, but I decided against it just because I've heard quite mixed things about the Ace Beauté formula. So I decided to hold off and wait for reviews on the palette, and since doing this list up, I haven't really thought a second thought about this palette, so I am kind of glad that I didn't buy it. When I look at it now, I do still think it's a very pretty palette. I just definitely don't need it in my collection. There's a lot of repeat shades in there that I already have in my collection, so I definitely don't need like additional versions of those same colors. Then we have the Beauty Bay and Nikki Tutorials palette. I was this close to buying this palette so many times, and by the time I decided for it, I thought, you know, there's already been too much time passed. I don't really need the palette. I didn't absolutely love the color story. I was more wanting to buy it just to support Nikki, but I decided that I definitely didn't need to support her. You know, I think she's got enough money as it is. She doesn't need me to give her extra dollars. She's doing very well for herself, so one extra person buying her palette is not going to make the difference in terms of supporting. I watch all her videos, so I thought that's enough. Then we have the KVD Vegan Beauty Kindness Vegan Doing Good Vegan Beauty holiday palette. I don't even know what this thing is called, but I was fairly keen to pick this up just to kind of support, you know, the changeover from Kat Von D to Kendo. I thought that it was a really good move and I wanted to support the move, but I decided that once again, they didn't need my dollars for the support. They didn't need me purchasing this palette to show them that people think that they're doing good. And the palette, I mean, it's a pretty looking palette, but I definitely didn't need it once again. The next one was the Charlotte Tilbury Instant Eye palette. I almost purchased this on release day. This was one of the palettes that was released not too long ago, and Charlotte Tilbury sent out an email to her VIP customers just because I'm subscribed to the email list. I got the email saying it was early access for this palette. I was this close to buying this palette. It's a very, very pretty palette. I have one of the quads from Charlotte Tilbury, and I'm pretty keen to try some more eyeshadows from Charlotte Tilbury eventually, but I just decided that I didn't need this palette. At the time when this palette was released, I had a lot of new eyeshadow palettes coming to my collection, and I decided that I needed to hold off, otherwise I wouldn't have been able to enjoy this palette for everything that it was good for. The Glam Light Ice Cream palette, and I have put this into my cart so many times, this palette. I have been tempted to buy this palette so many times. One of the main reasons why I was interested in this palette is because I do want to try the Glam Light formula, because people rave about the formula, but I don't like the weird shaped palettes. I don't like the weirdly shaped food themed palettes with the burgers and the tacos and all of that. And the ice cream palette is a nice big rectangle palette. It is a little bit big for my liking, but I can get behind it being just a nice rectangle. And I've actually heard that the formula for this palette is really nice. There's a lot of pastels in here, and I don't have a lot of pastels in my collection. I am still very tempted to pick this palette up. I've seen some beautiful looks done with this palette, but I still haven't committed. Maybe in the sales, I'm not quite sure. I might pick this one up. I don't know. I am still on the fence with this palette. Still on the fence. And the next two palettes are from Made by Mitchell. So it is the Head in the Clouds palette and the Feet on the Ground palette by Made by Mitchell. And I was really tempted to pick these up. There was a couple of websites in Australia that you could get these through pre-order, but none of the websites were very clear on exactly when you would get the palettes. And I wasn't 100% sure on what the formula would be like on these palettes. Having seen a few people review these palettes, I am a little bit regretful that I didn't buy these palettes, but I think I definitely will purchase the next palette from Made by Mitchell because I heard amazing things about the formula on these palettes. They swatched beautifully. The looks that I saw people create with these palettes were absolutely beautiful. So I think if Mitchell comes out with another palette in the new year with his brand, I think I might purchase it because I'm really keen to try the formula, see what it's like, see if it lives up to the hype, and you know, if it's a color story that I'm down with, I think I'll definitely pick it up. Number 15 is the Child palette, and I purely was going to purchase this just because of fandom. I love The Mandalorian, I love Star Wars, I love The Child, or go Gru if you haven't watched The Mandalorian, spoiler alert. But I wanted to purchase this palette for all of those reasons. I have absolutely loved watching The Mandalorian this year, so it really tugged on my heartstrings, this whole palette, but I resisted. I still might potentially purchase this palette. I'm not quite sure. With the exchange rate at the moment, I just can't really justify it. I do think it's a pretty palette. It is like these muted kind of green colors. I don't think I would get the most use out of the palette, but if I could get it for a good price, then I might pick it up. But with the exchange rate at the moment, it still isn't quite in the ballpark of pricing that I would like. I definitely still have this one on my list. I'm not quite sure. I probably won't buy it. I don't need it. I definitely don't need it, but it really tugs on those heartstrings. As well as the next one. The next one is the At Forest Sight palette. This is a collaboration with Raw Beauty Christie and Colourpop. Now I tried to get this palette in the second round of it, the second re-release. I don't know if Colourpop's going to do a further re-release of this palette. I might pick it up then, but every time I've tried to get my hands on this palette, it has been sold out. And if I am going to buy this palette, I probably would buy the Child palette at the same time. And every time either one of those palettes have been on the Colourpop website, they haven't been available at the same time. By the time I jumped on the Colourpop website for the last release, the palette was already sold out. So I really need to get on it because I think that this is an absolutely beautiful palette. It is it's a color story that I can get behind. I really like it. I think I would really enjoy playing with these colors, the like mustardy yellows, the teals and the blues in there. I think it is a really, really pretty eyeshadow palette, and I wouldn't be mad at having this in my collection. The next one is the Give Me Glow Vivid Rose eyeshadow palette. This one launched on Black Friday and I was very tempted to pick it up, but it wasn't on sale. If it was on sale, I probably would have snapped it up. But just because it wasn't on sale, it was full price on Black Friday, I decided to hold off and potentially wait for it to come on sale at a future time. But I would really like to try the Give Me Glow eyeshadow formula. And this is one of the eyeshadow palettes that they have released this year that I can really get behind. I love the color story of the palette. The colors are beautiful in it. The next one is the Clarity Cosmetics Berry Royal palette. Once again, this is a purple color story palette. I love purple eyeshadow if you haven't figured that out already. This palette was beautiful. I was very close to buying it. I think when I went to check out, the shipping was ridiculous. And then I also saw a few YouTubers reviewing the formula from Clarity Cosmetics and they weren't impressed. So All of those things combined made me resist buying this palette, and I decided to not go ahead with the purchase because it did end up being quite an expensive palette by the time I purchased the palette. Added shipping and exchange rate, it worked out to be fairly expensive for, I think this is only a 6-pan eyeshadow palette, 6 or 8-pan. Number 19 was the Sydney Grace Tiny Marvels palette. I think this is a beautiful palette, and once again, I was thinking about picking this up to support Mel. I think Mel is an amazing YouTuber. I think she's gorgeous. I think she does amazing eye looks. Her reviews are very thorough. She's always on the pulse with reviews, and I think this palette was gorgeous. The artwork on it was gorgeous. The colors that she chose, the color story, it's all gorgeous. But I find Sydney Grace is a little bit expensive with her shipping. I just decided that I really didn't need this palette. I didn't need to buy this palette once again to support Mel. Watching her videos is enough, and supporting her that way is enough. I still would not say no to this palette, but I'm not quite sure if by the time the next Sydney Grace sale rolls around, whether they'll still have this in stock or whether it will be discontinued by then. I'm not quite sure. I haven't really kept up with the restocking on this palette. The last one is the Super Beauty Hyper Color Palette. Now this is the, how many shades are in this palette? 2, 4, 6. This is the 12-pan eyeshadow palette. So it has 4 almost like highlighter colors on the end that are supposed to be UV, and then the other 8 colors are mattes that are also UV. Now this palette was beautiful. I was very tempted to pick it up. I decided that I didn't need it because I'm not big on like going out to the clubs and whatnot wearing UV eyeshadows and all that jazz. And I actually had a friend that had this palette. I borrowed it off her. I used it on some of my looks at my makeup school, and it just wasn't it. It wasn't packing the punch that I wanted. It wasn't really serving the purpose that I needed it for. So I am really thankful that I actually didn't pick up this palette, because I think I would have been fairly disappointed with the formula if I did pick it up myself. That is my list of 20 palettes that I was this close to buying in 2020. Let me know down in the comments box what palettes you almost picked up in 2020 but you've resisted. While you're down there, make sure you like this video, subscribe to my channel. You can join my membership, and you can also applaud this video as well while you are down there. That's it for this video, everyone. I hope that you're having an absolutely fantastic day. I hope that you are staying safe and healthy and looking after yourself, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye, beautiful. Ciao.